Episode 2. Beacon Trail. Search for the Pioneer. The salvage pings arrived in clusters, like messages from ghosts who couldn't quite remember their own names. I stood at Rin's console watching the decoded metadata scroll past, Waystation identifiers with Pioneer engineering stamps, timestamps that placed them in a debris field 2 days from our current position. Each ping was a promise. Supplies we desperately needed. Survivors who might still be breathing. Each ping was also a trap waiting to spring. 4 days had passed since we landed a small crew on Oasis 7 and brought aboard the first wave of Arcadia survivors. The Elysium now carried 200 more souls than she was designed for. And our life support systems groaned under the weight. Every breath we took cost fuel we didn't have. Every meal we served depleted reserves that couldn't be replaced. The salvage pings weren't just an opportunity. They were a lifeline we had no choice but to grasp. I'm Tomas Eri, acting captain of the Elysium, and I'd learned the hard way that in space, hope comes with receipts.
Captain, I've finished the analysis. The Waystation cluster matches Pioneer supply protocols, 12 individual stations positioned along their original transit route. Most are showing minimal power signatures, but 3 are broadcasting active distress codes.
Rin turned from her screen, her expression caught between excitement and worry. She'd been working non-stop since the pings first appeared, cross-referencing signal patterns against archived fleet data, trying to separate genuine distress from automated loops left behind by abandoned systems. Active distress means people. How old are the signals?
That's the problem. The timestamps are inconsistent. Some appear current, transmitted within the last 48 hours. Others are months old, but still repeating. I can't tell if we're hearing survivors or just echoes.
I nodded slowly, my mind already mapping the tactical problems. 2 days' travel meant burning fuel we'd barely managed to scrape together after Oasis 7. Active distress codes meant potential rescue operations, which meant more mouths to feed and more strain on systems already operating beyond their design limits. Pull the data together and meet me in the hold council chamber in 30 minutes. If we're doing this, we need consensus from the factions.
Understood. Should I prepare recommendations, or just present the raw intelligence?
Present the intelligence. Let them argue about what it means. That's what council meetings are for. Rin smiled faintly at that. A small acknowledgement of how quickly we'd both learned to navigate the politics of survival. The hold council chamber felt more crowded than usual. Probably because it actually was. We'd added 3 new representatives from the Arcadia survivors, and they brought with them a fresh desperation that made the old arguments seem almost quaint. Reverend Halim sat with his usual serene expression, but Moro Quell looked like a man calculating the value of every person in the room. Mara had chosen a seat near the back, her arms crossed, her expression suggesting she'd rather be anywhere else. I took my place at the head table and waited for the room to settle. Outside, the Elysium hummed with the sound of overtaxed systems, a mechanical reminder that every decision we made carried weight measured in oxygen and fuel. Thank you for coming. Rin has decoded salvage pings from a cluster of Pioneer waystations. I'll let her brief you on what we found.
2 days ago, we started receiving automated pings from what appears to be a ring of supply waystations along the Pioneer's original transit corridor. The metadata includes Pioneer engineering stamps, distress codes, and coordinates to a debris field, approximately 48 hours from our current position at standard thrust.
She paused, letting that sink in. 48 hours was a lifetime when you were counting every gram of fuel.
3 of the 12 stations are broadcasting what appear to be active distress codes, not just automated loops. That suggests survivors, but I can't confirm without closer analysis. The signals also indicate the presence of repair supplies, specifically thruster components and fuel processing equipment.
The room erupted into overlapping conversations. Halim leaned forward with interest, his congregation behind him already nodding in agreement. Quell's faction exchanged sharp glances, the kind that came before hard negotiations. One of the Arcadia representatives, a woman named Kira, stood up. Kira said her people had heard rumors about pioneer survivors turning into raiders, desperate groups who'd learned to prey on distress signals to lure in other ships. She said the waystations could be controlled by scavenger cartels, that we might be walking into a trap designed to strip us of everything we had left. Her voice carried the weight of someone who'd already lost everything once and refused to do it again. I'd met Kira 3 days ago when we brought the first Arcadia group aboard. She represented the pragmatic survivors, people who'd watched their ship fail and learned to distrust anything that looked like rescue. In another life, she might have been an accountant or a logistics coordinator. Now she was the voice of cautious fear, and she had every right to be. Halim countered that faith had guided them to Oasis 7 and saved the Arcadia survivors. He said the beacon was proof that Providence rewarded those who took righteous risks. That turning away from people in need was the same as condemning them to death. His followers murmured agreement, their faces bright with the conviction that came from believing every hardship was a test. I let them talk, watching Mara's expression grow darker with each passing minute. She understood better than most what the salvage run would cost, not just in fuel but in wear on systems that were already held together with improvised patches and desperate hope.
We need those thruster components. Our current microthrust array is operating at 60% efficiency, and I've already cannibalized every backup part I can find. If we don't resupply soon, we won't make it to the next viable system.
Mara's voice cut through the debate like a blade. She had a way of framing technical problems that made them impossible to ignore. What's the fuel cost for a 2-day burn followed by salvage operations?
Substantial. We can make the trip and perform limited salvage, but if we encounter resistance or need to execute emergency maneuvers, we'll be operating on fumes. Any complications, and we're stranded.
Quell spoke up, his tone flat and calculating. He said that if there were survivors at the waystations, they might have supplies worth trading for. He proposed sending a small advance team on the Sparrow to assess the situation before committing the Elysium. That way, if it was a trap, we'd only lose a shuttle and a handful of crew instead of the entire ship. I caught Mara's eye across the room. She gave me a slight nod, a silent acknowledgement that Quell's plan, cold as it was, made tactical sense. The Sparrow could reach the waystations faster than the Elysium, and with less fuel expenditure. If we found supplies and survivors, we could plan a proper retrieval. If we found pirates or automated defenses, we could retreat before committing everything. Here's what we'll do. Mara, prep the Sparrow for an advanced reconnaissance run. Minimal crew, maximum efficiency. Rin, compile a list of priority salvage targets based on the Pioneer manifests. If we're going into a debris field, I want to know exactly what we're looking for.
We'll need at least 12 hours to retrofit the Sparrow's scanning array and load additional fuel cells. And we'll need a pilot willing to take the risk.
Jax Calder raised his hand from the back of the room, his expression somewhere between confident and reckless. He said he'd flown worse missions with worse odds, that the Sparrow could handle anything short of active weapons fire. His reputation for risky maneuvers preceded him, and I wasn't sure if that made him the best choice or the worst. Jax, you're pilot. Mara, you're mission lead. Take Asha for systems work, and 1 security officer. Launch in 12 hours. The Sparrow departed 48 hours later. 12 hours behind schedule because Mara insisted on triple-checking the fuel calculations, and Asha needed extra time to retrofit a salvage scanner from cannibalized mining equipment. I watched from the bridge as the shuttle separated from the Elysium, a small bright point against the void, carrying 4 lives and most of my remaining optimism. The waiting was the worst part. Command meant making decisions and then living with the consequences, while other people risked their lives carrying them out. I'd sent crews on dangerous missions before. But it never got easier. That particular weight of responsibility that came from knowing you'd chosen who might die today.
Sparrow reports clean separation and nominal thrust. Estimated arrival at the first waystation in 37 hours.
Keep the channel open. I want updates every 4 hours, even if there's nothing to report.
Acknowledged.
I turned to look at the star field beyond the cracked bridge glass. Somewhere out there. The Pioneer's survivors were either waiting for rescue or setting a trap. In a few days, we'd find out which, and either way, the Elysium would pay the price. 39 hours after departure. Mara's voice crackled over the comms with news that was simultaneously promising and terrible. They'd reached the first waystation and found it intact, but booby-trapped. Someone, either the original Pioneer crew or scavengers who'd arrived later, had rigged the airlocks with improvised explosives and the docking clamps with sensors designed to trigger if approached too quickly.
Captain, we're looking at a defensive setup, not just automated decay. Someone expected visitors and didn't want them getting inside easily. Asha thinks she can bypass the sensors, but it's going to take time.
How much time?
4, maybe 5 hours. And that's assuming we don't trigger anything accidentally. The explosive charges are crude but effective. One wrong move and the whole airlock section decompresses.
I heard Jax's voice in the background, making some joke about explosive decompression being a quick way to lose weight. Mara told him to shut up and hold the Sparrow steady. Do you see any signs of survivors? Active power signatures, recent heat traces?
Negative on current activity, but the power core is still running at minimal output. Someone's been here within the last few weeks, maybe days. The question is whether they're still inside or if they've moved on to another station.
I thought about the tactical implications. Booby traps meant either paranoid survivors defending their supplies or raiders laying traps for rescue ships. Either way, it meant we were walking into a situation where trust was a liability and hesitation could kill you. Proceed with the bypass, but keep the Sparrow ready for emergency extraction. If anything looks wrong, abort and return to the Elysium.
Understood. Mara out.
The channel went quiet, leaving me alone with the hum of the bridge and the steady rhythm of my own breathing. Behind me, Rin worked at her console, monitoring the Sparrow's telemetry and cross-referencing the waystation signatures against archived Pioneer data.
Captain, I've been analyzing the distress patterns from the other 2 active waystations. There's something odd about the timing.
Define odd.
The signals synchronize every 12 hours, like they're coordinating with each other. That's not standard automated behavior. It suggests someone is actively managing the broadcasts, trying to create the appearance of multiple survivors across different locations.
A cold weight settled in my stomach. Coordinated signals meant organization. And organization meant either a functioning community or a predatory operation sophisticated enough to run a long con on desperate ships. Send that analysis to Mara. Tell her to expect company, friendly or otherwise.
Transmitting now.
6 hours later. Mara reported success. Asha had bypassed the sensors and disabled the explosive charges without incident, and the team was now inside the waystation cataloging supplies. The good news was that they'd found intact thruster components, fuel processing equipment, and enough spare parts to keep the Elysium running for another few months. The bad news was that they'd also found evidence of recent habitation and signs of violent conflict.
Captain, we've got bloodstains in the main corridor, and scorch marks consistent with plasma cutters used as weapons. Whoever was here fought hard to keep this place, and they lost.
Any bodies?
Negative. Either the survivors took their dead with them, or someone cleaned up afterward. But there's a data terminal in the control room that's still powered. Asha is trying to access the logs now.
I waited, listening to the background sounds of the salvage operation. Metal scraping against metal. Someone calling out inventory numbers. The hiss of cutting torches freeing components from their mountings. The sounds of survival, mechanical and precise.
Captain, Asha has something. Patching her through now.
Asha's voice came over the channel. Excited and slightly breathless. She said the data terminal contained partial logs from a Pioneer crew member, someone named Lyra, who documented the station's fall to raiders 3 weeks earlier. The logs described a coordinated attack by a group calling themselves the Ironworks Collective, scavengers who'd staked territorial claims over the debris field and were charging passage fees and supplies or labor. According to the logs, Lyra and a handful of other Pioneer survivors had fought to defend the Waystation, but were eventually overrun. The Ironworks took most of the survivors prisoner, intending to use them as labor for salvage operations on other derelicts. Lyra had managed to hide in a maintenance crawl space and escape after the raiders left, but she didn't know where the other prisoners had been taken. Does the log indicate where Lyra went after escaping? Asha said the last entry mentioned heading to a second waystation designated Pioneer 7A. About 6 hours travel from the current location. The log ended abruptly, suggesting either Lyra had run out of power to record, or something had interrupted her. Understood. Finish cataloging the salvage and prepare for extraction. We'll discuss next steps once you're back aboard the Elysium.
Copy that. We should have the critical components loaded within 3 hours. Mara out.
The Sparrow returned to the Elysium 18 hours later. Her cargo bay loaded with thruster components, fuel cells, and enough spare parts to make Mara cautiously optimistic about our long-term survival prospect. But the mission had also brought back something more valuable and more dangerous: information. The logs from the Waystation painted a picture of a debris field, controlled by organized scavenger cartels, groups who'd learned to weaponize desperation and trade in human capital. I called another Hold Council meeting to discuss our options. The chamber filled quickly. Word of the salvage run's success had spread, and people wanted to know what came next. Halim arrived with his usual entourage, Quell brought his scavenger faction, and the Arcadia representatives came prepared for another debate about risk and reward. Mara's team successfully retrieved critical supplies from the first Waystation. We now have enough thruster components and fuel processing equipment to keep the Elysium operational for at least 3 more months. However, they also recovered data logs indicating that Pioneer survivors are being held prisoner by a scavenger cartel operating in the debris field. I paused, letting that information settle. Around the room, expressions shifted from relief to concern to calculation. The logs mention a survivor named Lyra, who escaped to a second Waystation, Pioneer 7A. If she's still there, she might have intelligence about where the prisoners are being held and how we could mount a rescue operation. Halim spoke immediately, his voice carrying the weight of moral certainty. He said that abandoning prisoners was unthinkable, that every survivor was a life worth saving regardless of the cost. His followers nodded vigorously, their faces set with determination. Quell countered that mounting a rescue against an organized cartel was suicide. He said we'd already stretched our resources thin with the salvage run. That risking the Elysium to save people we didn't know and who might already be dead was the kind of emotional decision that got entire crews killed. His faction murmured agreement, their expressions hard and practical. Kira from the Arcadia group spoke up, her voice careful and measured. She said that if there were prisoners, they likely had skills and knowledge that could benefit the Elysium. Engineers, technicians, medical personnel, people who understood the Pioneer's systems and might help integrate the salvage technology. From a purely practical standpoint, rescuing them was a resource acquisition, not charity. I watched the debate unfold, measuring each argument against the reality of our situation. We had supplies now, enough to buy us time. But we didn't have intel about the cartel's strength, their weapons, or their willingness to negotiate versus fight. Going in blind was asking for casualties we couldn't afford.
I can have the Sparrow ready for another run to Pioneer 7 within 24 hours. We find Lyra, get her intelligence, and reassess based on what we learn. No commitment to a rescue operation until we have actionable data.
Agreed. Mara, prep the Sparrow for departure. Same crew, same protocol. If you find Lyra and she's willing to talk, bring her back. If you encounter cartel forces, retreat immediately. We're gathering intelligence, not picking fights.
Understood.
The Sparrow launched 26 hours later. 2 hours behind schedule, because Jax insisted on running diagnostic checks after noticing a fluctuation in the port thruster. Mara grudgingly admitted he was right when the checks revealed a worn fuel injector that would have failed mid-flight. They replaced the part, ran the checks again, and finally cleared for departure with grudging respect on both sides. This time, the waiting felt different. Heavier somehow. The first salvage run had been about survival, pure and simple. This run was about something more complicated. The question of who we were willing to risk ourselves for, and what that choice said about the kind of community we were trying to build.
Sparrow reports arrival at Pioneer 7. They're scanning for power signatures and recent activity.
Keep the channel open. I want real-time updates. 14 minutes later. Mara's voice came through with measured urgency. They'd found the waystation intact and broadcasting a weak distress signal, but the airlocks showed signs of forced entry. Someone had cut through the external seals with industrial tools, either to get in or to keep people trapped inside.
Captain, we're picking up faint life signs inside the station. At least 3 heat signatures, possibly more in shielded compartments. But there's also a second ship docked on the far side, a heavy cargo hauler with active weapons systems.
My pulse quickened. Weapons systems meant the cartel was still here, either conducting salvage operations or guarding prisoners. Either way, the Sparrow was outgunned and vulnerable. Mara, assess the tactical situation. Can you board without being detected?
Negative. The hauler's scanning array has us bracketed. They know we're here.
A new voice cut into the channel. Male, confident, and carrying the casual menace of someone used to having leverage. The voice introduced himself as Ven, second in command of the Ironworks Collective. He said they controlled 12 waystations in the debris field and claimed salvage rights to everything within a 6-hour radius. He said the Sparrow was trespassing on Ironworks territory and owed a passage fee, either in supplies or labor. He suggested we negotiate terms before things got unpleasant. I exchanged glances with Rin. She looked as worried as I felt. Negotiating with pirates was always a gamble. They had no incentive to honor agreements once they had what they wanted, and every incentive to take everything they could. Patch me through to Ven. Let's see what kind of deal he's offering.
Channel open? You're live?
This is Captain Tomas Eri of the Elysium. We're not interested in your salvage claims, and we're not paying passage fees. We're here looking for survivors from the Pioneer. If you have prisoners, we're willing to discuss terms for their release. There was a pause. Long enough for me to wonder if Ven was conferring with his crew or just letting the silence do tactical work. Ven's voice came back smooth and reasonable. He said the Ironworks didn't take prisoners. They offered employment. The Pioneer survivors under his care were working off their debts in exchange for food, shelter, and protection from the void. He said they were treated fairly and had chosen to stay rather than risk the empty dark on their own. He offered to let us speak with them directly if we doubted his word. I didn't believe him for a second. People who chose to stay didn't need to be guarded by armed haulers. But calling him a liar would only escalate the situation. And the Sparrow was still outgunned. We'd like to speak with the survivors. If they confirm they're staying voluntarily, we'll leave you to your business. But if they want to come with us, we're taking them. Another pause. This one felt more dangerous. Like Ven was calculating whether forcing a confrontation was worth the cost. The Sparrow was small, but the Elysium represented a much larger prize if he decided to escalate. Ven said we could send a representative to board Pioneer 7 under escort. He'd arrange a meeting with the survivors in 1 hour. Any hostile action would be met with immediate retaliation. He closed the channel before I could respond.
Captain, this feels like a setup. They'll take whoever we send as leverage and demand supplies for their release.
Probably. But if there are survivors inside who want out, we need to make contact. Mara, you're the ranking officer. Take Asha for technical assessment, and 1 security escort. Keep the Sparrow ready for emergency extraction.
Understood. Moving to board now.
The next hour dragged with excruciating slowness. I watched the telemetry feed from Mara's suit camera as she moved through Pioneer 7's cramped corridors. Escorted by 2 ironworks guards who looked more like prison wardens than salvage crew. The Waystation interior showed signs of habitation, makeshift bunks, cooking equipment, stacks of salvage supplies, but also signs of control. Locked doors, surveillance cameras, and an atmosphere of quiet desperation. Mara reached what looked like a common area and found 3 Pioneer survivors waiting under guard. A young woman in her early 20s stepped forward. Her expression guarded but hopeful. She identified herself as Lyra, the same engineer who'd written the logs at the first Waystation. Lyra said she'd tried to stay hidden after escaping the first attack. But the ironworks found her 3 days later. She said they'd put her to work repairing salvaged equipment and told her she was paying off her debt for rescue and protection. But the debt never seemed to decrease, and anyone who complained about the arrangement disappeared to other stations where conditions were worse. Mara asked if the other survivors felt the same way. A man in his 30s. Someone Lyra called Kale said most of them wanted to leave but were afraid of what would happen if they tried. The ironworks controlled the only functional ships in the debris field, and striking out alone meant certain death. I listened to the exchange through the comms link. My jaw tight with anger. Ven's operation wasn't employment. It was indentured servitude dressed up in reasonable language. And the survivors knew it, but they also knew they had no leverage to fight back. Mara, offer them transport to the Elysium. Anyone who wants to come with us, we'll take them. But it's clear we're not forcing anyone. This has to be their choice.
Understood.
Mara relayed the offer. All 3 survivors immediately agreed to leave. Lyra said there were 5 more Pioneer crew scattered across 2 other waystations. But she didn't know if they could be reached without triggering a violent response from the ironworks. That's when the situation deteriorated. One of the ironworks guards stepped forward and said no one was leaving without Ven's approval. The transfer of labor contracts required compensation, either in supplies or equivalent work hours. If the Elysium wanted to buy out the survivors, they'd need to negotiate terms. I could hear the calculation in Mara's voice when she responded. The careful weighing of tactical options against moral imperatives.
Stand down. These people are coming with us, and we're not paying you for their freedom.
The guard reached for his sidearm. Mara moved faster, dropping him with a precise strike to the nerve cluster at his neck. The second guard barely had time to react before Asha hit him with a salvage tool. It was over in seconds, brutal and efficient.
Sparrow, we're hot. Prep for emergency extraction. All survivors, move now.
The comms channel exploded with overlapping voices. Jax acknowledged the extraction order and began maneuvering the Sparrow into position. Alarms blared on Pioneer 7 as the station's systems registered hostile activity. And somewhere above it all, Ven's voice cut through with cold fury, promising retaliation for what he called an act of piracy. "Mara, get everyone to the Sparrow. We'll deal with Ven's threats later." The next 10 minutes were chaos compressed into seconds. I watched through the telemetry feed as Mara herded the survivors through corridors, while Ironworks crew scrambled to respond. Asha sealed bulkhead doors behind them, buying precious seconds. The Sparrow's docking clamps released with a metallic clang, and Jax executed a reverse thrust that would have been reckless if it weren't absolutely necessary. The Ironworks hauler fired warning shots across the Sparrow's bow. Plasma bolts that superheated the vacuum and left glowing trails against the dark. Jax dodged with a lateral burn that pushed the shuttle's thrusters to their limits, then accelerated hard on a vector that would take them back to the Elysium. Ven's voice came over the emergency channel, threatening pursuit and retaliation. He said the Elysium had made an enemy today, that the Ironworks controlled access to every viable salvage field within a 10-day radius, and that we'd just ensured our own starvation by burning bridges with the only organized group in the region. I listened to his threats with the cold pragmatism that came from knowing he was probably right. We'd rescued 3 survivors and made ourselves a target. The question now was whether the intelligence they brought was worth the cost. "All hands, prepare for possible pursuit. Rin, monitor long-range scans Decoder. If that hauler changes course toward us, I want to know immediately."
Understood. Captain, the Sparrow is on approach. Estimated docking in 40 minutes.
The Sparrow docked without incident, and the 3 Pioneer survivors came aboard, looking exhausted but grateful. Lyra immediately offered to help integrate the salvage thruster components, saying she'd worked on Pioneer's propulsion systems and knew the specifications by heart. Kale offered to brief our security team on Ironworks tactics and patrol patterns. The 3rd survivor, a quiet woman named Senna, said she just wanted a safe place to sleep for the first time in weeks. I met with Lyra privately in the engineering bay, while Mara supervised the installation of the new thruster components. She was younger than I'd expected. Early 20s, with dark circles under her eyes, and the kind of exhaustion that came from carrying impossible burdens for too long. "Thank you for the intel. The logs you left at the first waystation gave us the context we needed to understand what we were walking into." Lyra nodded, her expression guarded. She said she documented everything because she knew someone would eventually come looking for survivors, and she wanted them to know what had happened. She said the Pioneers' breakup wasn't just bad luck or mechanical failure. She'd seen fragments in the ship's final logs, encrypted messages between the bridge crew about transit anomalies, and deliberate course corrections that didn't match the planned route. She said there was a datapad she'd hidden at Pioneer 7 before the Ironworks found her bee, locked in a maintenance locker with a personal access code. The datapad contained the encrypted logs and references to something called the Last Archive, a rumored data repository connected to the world Hestia. Why hide the datapad instead of bringing it with you? Lyra said she didn't trust anyone at that point. Not after watching her crew torn apart by scavengers and desperation. She'd hidden it as insurance, something to bargain with if she needed leverage. Now she was offering it freely, payment for rescue, and a chance to warn other ships about what happened to the Pioneer. "Can we retrieve the datapad without going through the Ironworks?" Lyra said probably not. Pioneer 7 was deep inside their controlled territory. And after today's extraction, they'd be watching every approach vector. But she added that the datapad's encryption was key to her biometrics. If the Ironworks found it, they couldn't access the contents without her, which meant it might still be leverage if we needed to negotiate. I thanked her, and promised we'd discuss recovery options once we'd assessed the Ironworks threat level. She looked relieved, like she'd finally set down a weight she'd been carrying for too long. The Hold Council met again that evening to discuss our next moves. The successful rescue had earned us goodwill from the factions who valued saving lives. But it had also made us enemies of the only organized power structure in the debris field. Quell was furious, saying we'd thrown away our salvage access for 3 people who might not even have skills worth the cost. Halim was triumphant, claiming the rescue proved that moral action was its own reward. Kira looked thoughtful, like she was recalculating her assessment of what kind of captain I was. We've secured 3 survivors and gained valuable intelligence about both the Pioneer's fate and the cartel operating in this region. The cost was making an enemy of the Ironworks, which controls access to most viable salvage in a 10-day radius. I let that hang in the air for a moment, making sure everyone understood the trade we'd made. Lyra has offered to help integrate the salvaged components and brief us on Ironworks tactics. She's also revealed the existence of a hidden datapad containing encrypted logs about the Pioneer's final days. Those logs may explain why the fleet broke up and point toward our next destination.
The thruster components are already improving our propulsion efficiency. With Lyra's help, we can install the fuel processing equipment within 3 days. That gives us operational capability to reach Hestia if the datapad confirms it as a viable destination.
Quell asked why we should risk another confrontation with the Ironworks over a datapad that might contain nothing useful. He said we had what we came for: supplies and a few survivors. Pushing our luck by going back for encrypted data was the kind of mission creep that turned tactical victories into strategic disasters. Hallen countered that understanding the fleet's fate was essential to preventing future losses. He said the datapad might contain warnings about the transit anomalies, information that could save other ships. His followers nodded, but I noticed some of them looked uncertain, like they were starting to question whether every risk was truly providential or just reckless. I made eye contact with Rin across the room. She'd been quiet throughout the meeting, listening and cataloging information. Now she raised her hand slightly, a request to speak.
Captain, I've been analyzing the transit data from the Lode Pulse and cross-referencing it with the Waystation signatures. There's a pattern that suggests the fleet breakup wasn't random. If the datapad confirms deliberate interference with the transit stream, it changes everything about our navigation protocols going forward.
That shifted the calculation. Navigation protocols meant survival. If someone or something had deliberately caused the fleet to scatter, we needed to know about it before we attempted another transit jump. We'll plan a retrieval mission for the datapad, but only after we've assessed the Ironworks patrol patterns and identified a window where we can move without triggering a confrontation. Mara, work with Kale to map their operational coverage. Rin, continue analyzing the transit data. We move when we're ready, not before. 4 days later, the Sparrow made a third run to Pioneer 7, this time during what Kale had identified as a shift change in the Ironworks patrol schedule. Jax flew a wide approach vector that kept them outside standard scanning range until the last possible moment, then executed a rapid docking maneuver that left them exposed for less than 90 seconds. Mara and Asha moved through the waystation with practiced efficiency, guided by Lyra's directions transmitted from the Elysium. They located the maintenance locker, bypassed the access lock, and retrieved the datapad without encountering resistance. The extraction went so smoothly it felt suspicious, like we'd gotten away with something we shouldn't have. We had. 6 hours after the Sparrow returned, Ven sent a message through an encrypted channel. He said the Ironworks had allowed the retrieval because they'd already examined the datapad and concluded it was worthless without Lyra's biometric key. He said consider it a parting gift, a professional courtesy from one salvage operation to another. But he added that the next time we entered Ironworks territory, there would be consequences. I didn't know whether to believe him or prepare for retaliation. In the end, I did both. Lyra decrypted the datapad over the next 2 days, working in shifts with Rin to parse the technical data and reconstruct the Pioneer's final log entries. What they found confirmed our worst suspicions and opened questions we didn't have answers for. The Pioneer's navigation officer had documented systematic anomalies in the transit stream during their final jump. Gravitational distortions that didn't match any natural phenomena and appeared to be steering the fleet into divergent paths. The logs included references to similar reports from the Arcadia and Hestia, suggesting all 3 ships had detected the interference but couldn't coordinate a response before the fleet scattered. The final entries mentioned Hestia, specifically. A transmission fragment that referenced something called the Last Archive and coordinates to a stable orbit around the colony world. The logs ended abruptly, suggesting either the Pioneer's systems failed or the crew prioritized other emergencies over documentation. Rin brought the decrypted data to me in the bridge 3 days after the retrieval. She looked tired but also energized. The way she got when signal analysis revealed patterns she hadn't expected.
Captain, the datapad confirms deliberate interference with the transit stream. Someone or something was redirecting the fleet, either to isolate us or to force us towards specific destinations. The coordinates for Hestia are solid, and the reference to the Last Archive suggests there's something there worth investigating.
Deliberate interference means someone with technology sophisticated enough to manipulate transit physics. That's not scavenger cartel level. That's infrastructure built by an organization with resources and planning.
Agreed. And if they're still active, we need to know what they want and whether they're responsible for the fleet's collapse.
I looked at the coordinates displayed on her screen. A set of numbers that represented either our next destination or another trap waiting to spring. Command meant making decisions with incomplete information, and this felt like the biggest incomplete decision yet. Set course for Hestia. We'll use the new thruster components to maximize fuel efficiency and plan for a long approach. If someone's expecting us, I want time to assess the situation before we commit.
Understood. Transmitting course data to Mara for propulsion calculations.
I watched as the star field on the bridge display shifted, recalculating our trajectory based on the new destination. Somewhere ahead, Hestia waited with answers or more questions. Either way, we were committed now. The Elysium turned slowly on her new heading. Microthrusts firing in careful sequence, carrying us toward whatever came next.